Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar titled Instant Payment, Enhancing Security with Verification of Payee and Effective Real-Time Fraud Control. My name is Melisande Moeral, publisher of the papers, and I'm delighted to be the co-host of today's session with our partner EaseNets. And thank you so much for tuning in on your coffee break or on your lunch break, and it's great to see so many of you tuning in today. So what's the story? Well, instant payment fraud is on the rise globally, and many FIs remain ill-prepared, burdened by technical debt, and struggle to keep pace with digital native entrants or combat complex fraud. Yet, regulatory deadlines for additional security measures, for instance, verification of payee, are approaching, and consumer expectations for speed, convenience, and security at no additional costs are rising. And if that weren't enough, regulators are also mandating that banks reimburse consumer victims. In the UK, the Payment Sister Regulation has announced new mandatory reimbursement requirements for victims of APP scams, which will come into force on October 7th. In Europe, the proposed Payment Service Regulation aims to mandate that EU PSPs reimburse consumer victims for a specific range of authorized fraud or scams. This requirement is more limited than the upcoming UK requirements, which mandates refunds for any authorized fraud type via faster payments. However, this could change before it comes into effect. So this presents a huge challenge for financial institutions striving to become compliant in time for the regulatory deadlines. So now is the time to accelerate the implementation of effective and efficient strategies to prevent instant payment fraud. So stay tuned to learn how to accelerate adoption. So before introducing the speakers, some quick notes regarding housekeeping. The discussion will take approximately 45 minutes, and we will have 10 minutes for a Q&A at the end of the webinar. On the right side of your screen, you can see the chat panel, which includes a chat room and a Q&A widget. You can use that Q&A widget to ask questions at any time throughout the discussion. We will compile the questions, and the speakers will take as many as possible at the end of the discussion. We also have subtitles available for this webinar. You can activate them by just clicking on the CC icon. They are available in English, Spanish, Italian, German, French, and Portuguese. After enabling the subtitles, please allow a few seconds for them to appear in your selected language. So, and lastly, in the handout section, you can find an interesting report on fraud, risk, and fast payments from the World Bank as a reference. So, today I'm joined by Marie-Christine Diaz, Business Development Manager at EaseNets, Linda Kuijks, Payment Director at InnoPay, Caspar Loog, Director Product Management at LHV, and Alain Raas, Founding Partner and CCO at iPad. So, hi guys, it's great to see you today. Hope you're well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So, could you tell the audience a bit about yourself and your current role? And maybe we can start with Marie-Christine.
Yes, thank you, Melisande. Hi, everyone. So my name is Marie-Christine Diaz. I'm Business Development Manager at EaseNets. EaseNets is a company holding a portfolio for compliance and transaction banking services for more than 700 institutions, corporates and financial institutions around the globe, and we operate since more than 20 years, in Europe and also in the Middle East.
Great, thank you, Marie-Christine. Linda.
I've been in payments for over 10 years. First as head of strategy for a large bank covering most of Europe, and been involved in management of EPI, and recently joined InnoPay as director payments. Involved in all payments-related projects.
Thank you. Sorry, I was a bit distracted by your lovely cat. Thanks, Linda. Then Caspar, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caspar Loog. I'm the Director of Product Management in LHV Bank. LHV is an Estonian-based financial group which also contains two banks, one in Estonia and one in UK. And maybe worth noting here is that LHV is one of the largest instant payment processing banks in Europe. So we process about 7% of instant payments in the Eurozone. And we also serve about 200 fintech companies, providing them access to the payment rails both in Europe and UK. So we have quite a bit of insight in terms of instant payment processing and the associated fraud.
Lovely. Really happy that we have you in our panel, Caspar. Thank you. Alain.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alain Haas. I'm one of the co-founder and also Chief Commercial Officer of iPaid. iPaid is a Singapore incorporated company. We're based in Singapore. And basically, for those of you who know what is COP or VOP are all about, iPaid is designed to provide COP and VOP related services globally. We do that in Europe, in the UK, but also in many other countries in the world as well. We've been founded about 3 years ago. My background is a lot about payments. I've been at Swift for more than 30 years. So I know quite a bit about when it comes to payments.
Yeah. And to your point, and for the audience, there is, I didn't count, but maybe decades of payment experience and experience of processing instant payments in this panel. So don't be shy. We're sure there's lots of questions on this pressing topic. It's very timely to discuss this topic. So please reach out to the speakers. They would love to take your questions. So what are we going to discuss today? We'll start with a little bit of context, like what is the regulatory and industry roadmap, but also what are the key objectives of this regulation and what are the challenges that the industry is facing. We will discuss what the advanced technologies are needed to address these challenges, which strategies there are to accelerate adoption, and we will look into the future, like what is needed to basically enable all stakeholders in this industry to combat instant payment fraud. So let's dive in a little bit into the regulation. Yeah, we can have the slide on. Thank you. As discussed a bit in the introduction, very briefly about the timelines, but banks and PSPs in the EU member state that use euros, the deadline for receiving SET Inst is January 9th, and the deadline to send SET Inst is October 9th, including offering a VOP service for IBAN and name check. The UK is well advanced with an available COP service, confirmation of payee, but additional rules are expected to apply by October 7th for FPS and CAMS payments, which basically entail that PSPs must reimburse the victim within 5 business days, and there are rules for shared liability between the sending and the receiving financial institution. On a global level, G20 goals for cross-border payments around speed, transparency, cost, and access for cross-border account-to-account transfers result in the European, in the EPC's one leg out instant credit transfer scheme. It's a lot of words, also called OCT Inst, which sees industry traction and need for payment validation. So this is a little bit about sort of the timelines and what these regulations entail. But what I would like to ask Marie-Christine, if you look into the regulator, there are sure some key objectives. Could you elaborate a bit on the key objectives of the regulation for instant payments and the verification of payee mandates in the UK and SEPA EU?
Yes, Madison. So clearly, the fraud detection mechanism and measures that are being put in place for payments, and more specifically for instant payments, are not sufficient. We know that the fraud risk is very high in the market. So we can summarize the objectives of the regulations into 5 big points, I would say. The first one is really to share much more fraud data within the industry players, the financial industry players, but also across industry. You know that when you look at fraud for payments and certain instant payments, this fraud is not really actually a payment fraud. It's related to the initial transaction, which happens on platforms which are not secure, where the onboarding mechanisms are very weak. So that's the first thing, to share data information about fraud. The second thing is the launch of the validation of the IBAN and beneficiary name, the account and name. This is going out in Europe for the moment for October 2025. UK is already implementing this. But then next to it, the most important aspect is also to share the risk indicators related to this validation. More certainly, when we look at partial matches, it's very important to have much more contextual data and risk data that can help the financial industry to really have a better view on the fraud. The third point, which is quite important because it's related to user experience, is not to give an action and intervention and warnings to the end user, whether it's a customer, retail customer, or business, which is not very effective, basically. But really to make interventions where really there is a fraud case or suspicious of fraud case which is based on data. That's the third aspect, which is very important to limit the friction with the user and accelerate the adoption of instant payment. And then there are two other aspects which are very important and measures that the regulators want to take. The first one is to help the industry with a risk-based approach to decide to hold or stop payments and freeze funds, which is very similar to what the card business is doing. And finally, we have been seeing with open banking and PSD2 that the sending sign is very well protected with strong customer authentication and multi-factor authentication. But now the shift of the fraud is on the receiving side, the beneficiary account. So the regulators will have to take measures to have tighter controls on the accounts that are on the receiving PSPs.
Yeah, great, Marie-Christine. Thanks for elaborating on these objectives. If we talk a little bit about the challenges and also the lessons learned from, for instance, in the UK, I recall, Casper, when we prepared this webinar, you mentioned that Europe, after the experience in the UK, should be prepared for the worst. What can Europe learn from the implementation of confirmation of payee in the UK? And what should be done differently?
I think in the UK, we need to take into account that the starting points are very, very different to Europe. So faster payments was introduced back in 2007, and person-to-person payments area, this is happening basically near real time. Difference with SEPA Instant is that faster payments is a near real time scheme, not a real time scheme. But when we talk about fraud, or as in UK, it's called APP fraud usually, the levels are much higher in the UK, and this is a big topic. And the reason is very simple. Europe has not jumped on the instant payment bandwagon yet. There are only few selected areas where instant payments are the norm, which is the Baltics and the Netherlands. And the other countries are basically still in the batch-based clearing world, but with the majority of the payments. And that's simply the primary reason why we still haven't seen a big uptick. And the fraudsters are definitely targeting the banks who have instant payment outbound enabled for all the consumers. Mm-hmm. And in the UK, this is a norm, and therefore it works from any provider nearly. But when we talk about the actual impact, then I think we need to separate the marketing hype from the real proportions. So by marketing hype, I mean that usually the fraud numbers which are given out, they are in millions, or in some cases fractions of a billion. Mm-hmm. But when you put it into the context of the whole payment volume and compare it, say, to the card schemes or what we used to see over there, then in some cases, I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. However, the impact is much bigger because people are losing their life savings in many cases. And this is on a personal level disaster.
Yeah, so then I would like to comment that that's actually what we see in the Dutch market, that actually what we call bank employee fraud, or the spoofing fraud, is actually has been significantly higher than we've seen for either credit cards and stolen debit cards combined in the last years. And we already have a confirmation of payee in the market in 2017. the Dutch market switched fully or almost completely for consumer credit transfers to instant in 2019. And as of 2020, the amount started to rise significantly. So the number of transactions that are fraudulent might be lower, but the amounts are significantly higher. And indeed, as Casper said, the impacts, it can be someone's life saving. So in the Netherlands, we've seen it go up after introducing instant payments in 2019. Bank employee fraud went up to 26 million in 2020. Whereas if you compare the total combined volume of bank card fraud, stolen cards and credit card fraud, was probably about 9 million at the time in that year. And when in 2022, it even went up to over 50 million euros. And they now implemented a 4-hour delay for large transactions. Essentially, you need, if you want to up your limits for large transactions above 1,500 or 2,000 euros, you need to wait 4 hours before you can actually execute. Your limit will be increased. You can execute the transaction in order to prevent these types of cases happening. And there's that effect of that is that you're seeing in 2023, we've already seen employee the spoofing fraud decline to about under 30 million.
Okay, so these were some measures that were taken in the Netherlands, capping the amount and having some time in between transactions. What were interesting measures that were taken in the UK to bring to basically decrease APP fraud? Anything that can be learned from the tactics that are used in the UK? Casper, if you could comment on that.
So I think two facts that I kind of pick out from this example. I mean, I think Netherlands has much more effectively implemented confirmation of payee because it covers, I think, about 99.5% of the whole payment volume happening in the country. I'm speaking from the top of my head. In the UK, it was first rolled out to just 9 larger banks, and now the rollout is going to the smaller players as well in the market. So the number of institutions will be 300 plus or something like that. But I think the learning point here from Netherlands is that after introducing COP, the fraud still kept growing. So that's I think the interesting point. And secondly, you have to take into account that the card schemes have been very effective implementing the 3DS authentication to the card payments. And also the card payments by and large are actually much more limited in terms of transaction value. So you can't steal as much through the card as you can with wire payments.
And I agree with that. And the key difference is that confirmation of pay only solves one of the problems, and that if someone sends you an email, please transfer money to this account. If you then don't have, and you think if you think it's the name of your brother, you're more likely to do it than if it's a strange name, right? And that you filter out that. But the stealing of credentials, because that's effectively what the spoofing part is, where they steal your credentials, or they let you do a transaction through a link. So that's actually the core problem that you see here.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I also wanted to have some perspectives from Alain. What are the challenges from your perspective here?
Well, first of all, just talking about fraud level, right? I mean, and then I'll come to the point you mentioned. Just putting this globally, I mean, we at IPID have been in touch with hundreds and hundreds of counterparties over the last 2.5 years. And there hasn't been actually a single of those which has told us actually that the problem statements we're talking about fraud is not real. I mean, everybody, everywhere, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, Europe, US, Asia, same thing, right? Same problems, and most of them are just following the fact that many countries are moving to real-time payments, and therefore the consequence is eventually about having more fraud. So when it comes to the challenges, I see a couple of them, 3 or 4 actually. One is really the quality of data that needs to be shared to avoiding fraud, especially when VOP will be implemented fully in the UK with COP, but the next year when it comes to Europe, is really about the quality of the data you're going to have, and also, most importantly, how you will interpret the mismatch you're going to have, because you see that with VOP, you're going to have 3 results, full match, no match, or partial match, right? And how this data will be interpreted actually will be really crucial to decide actually whether the payment should follow through or not. Second challenge is obviously the tight deadlines. I've seen in my career many new regulation coming up in Europe. None of them actually, all of them have been implemented ultimately, but none of them actually have been implemented as per the original deadline. So certainly there will be actually some adjustment to be made. I've been attending a couple of meetings, conference over the last 2 or 3 months. Most of them now having COP and VOP on the top of the agenda. And there you see that everybody says the same thing, right? It's going to be very hard to achieving the full compliance by the deadline that is being set by the Commission, right? Then interoperability. I mean, UK is UK. Obviously, yes, COP is about all payments in pounds in the UK. That's one country. Europe is Euro, single country, but many countries, right? So therefore, how is that going to work ultimately? What's going to be the ultimate web of validation is going to happen in the network of validation mechanism that will happen in the continent? That's still to be decided. You know that the EPC is set to finalizing a scheme for all participants by after the summer, September, October. We'll see from there. But also, how is that going to work after that? Will there be actually a certain number of aggregators? Who's going to be playing that role? How and where each and every participant will have to connect to? All of that still to be defined. And we see also in the market many practitioners, players that are now working and trying to find what's going to be the ultimate validation network that will set for Europe. And then finally, perhaps the last point is response time. I mean, you've seen actually the kind of response time that have been set into the regulation. We're talking about 3 seconds end to end. Depending on where you are, it's going to be rather difficult to achieving this as well. So I think the overall architecture of what will be VOP over time will have to take that into account. And then finally, I'm not sure actually that yet PSPs, banks and non-banks PSPs have really factored already in the consequence of not being VOP compliant, right? Especially in terms of liability shift. I mean, UK has moved already a long way into that, but sooner or later it's going to happen in Europe as well. So how that will be incorporated into actually the sort of bylaws of the PSPs, that's also to be defined.
Yeah. Well, Alain, to your point that the deadlines are tight, it's on top of everyone's roadmap. We have a poll question for the audience, because we would like to know, how ready are you to verify IBAN beneficiary verification of payee for SET Inst? Is that not started yet? Just started planning, under implementation, ready for domestic VOP, but not yet compliant with the EC Instant Payment Regulation, or ready and compliant with VOP for the EC Instant Payment Regulation. So we give you a couple of seconds to reply to this, and I would like to know what do you think? What does our panel think that where the audience is?
I think our experience shows that with SEPA we didn't meet the deadlines, and definitely here what I can see from the discussions I have with the banks and different partners is that it's quite difficult to implement. Certainly for the banks that are not in the retail business, the ones that are doing investment management or asset management, these are still very important deadlines and they don't know how to do it.
Okay, well, let's look into the poll results and then see what we...
That's what I thought.
Yeah, explain.
I had bet on just started planning. That's what I hear as well.
Majority not started yet, just started planning. Yeah. So that's a little bit according to what you thought. Well, let's move on.
Perhaps one thing here, right? I mean, this is quite revealing about the way that the financial industry is always reacting against regulations. They first do whatever is possible not to face regulation, and when they realize they cannot do that, then here we go to start adopting the regulation, and it's always far too late, right? They're losing a lot of time to fighting against, and then we go, you need to adapt it.
Yeah, which is a nice segue to the next topic, which is basically the technologies out there to support VOP across countries and regions. And maybe, Alain, if you could elaborate a bit on the on basically how you support institutions facing this interoperability issue in well, in a smooth, cost-effective way.
So it's actually quite, I mean, this is a difficult slide, right? So I'm going to sort of paraphrase it. So typically, as I said at the beginning of this webinar, what we do at IP is basically doing COP and VOP actually globally. So we've built over the years actually a global platform that enable any payer's PSP to validate essential data point of the payee, but in many different jurisdictions, so globally, right? Now, when it comes to VOP and COP, the paradigm is shifting a little bit, because in the case of COP and VOP, you need to do this in both directions, right? I mean, your first obligation is for the PSPs is to offer the validation of payee in any channels you offer to your clients, but also at the same time you need to be able to offer an access point so that you can receive validation requests and therefore provide an answer to the requester. So it is even more challenging. And that's why at IPAID we've combined this two-phase platform into a single node that basically perform for the banks actually this outbound but also inbound validation request in a pretty seamless approach as well. Of course, that needs to be integrated with your banking core systems. That's of course to be done, because you need to apply the algorithm, you need to apply the rules. So that is in the making, as I said before. But the sort of a core service that IP does, actually the core business we have, is about precisely validating the key information of the payee before actually sending the payments. And it is really about the shift of not only validating the payer, but also shifting the attention to the receiving account, because there as well, you can have many signals that tells you that eventually the payments you're going to make could be dodgy.
Yeah. Thank you, Alain. I would like to talk a little bit more about the sort of the practice, and Linda, what you see in banks when you worked at a bank or now you're working with banks. What do you see as challenges for investigators at banks and PSPs that fight instant payment fraud? And COP FOP is one tool. It might not be the answer to, the only answer. But what are the challenges that you see investigators facing?
To simply put, it's the challenge for moving from a reactive fraud, where you can just look at what's happening in your batches of approved payments that haven't gone through settlement yet, versus moving to predictive fraud, where, okay, this transaction has a certain pattern and we need to prevent it from happening. And that just requires a lot more analysis upfront in order to develop the correct algorithms, and also people, because you will be generating more alerts and you also need to follow up on those alerts, so that requires more people.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Casper, on the challenge for investigators and the...
I think the key here is actually speed. And it's been measured that to recover a fraudulent payment, the victim has about 16 minutes from the time when the payment has been made. If it's more than that, then the money's gone. And say we compare UK practice of handling recalls and the European practice of handling recalls, then I think Europe has a huge advantage thanks to the standard recall messages implemented in the SEPA payment schemes. In the UK, it's a very laborious and manual process, and it's quite frankly not acceptable how the industry is currently forced to handle this. It should be actually solved with the payment scheme. So data interchange and quick reaction to fraud reports, so that the receiving bank can close the account, freeze the funds, and basically halt the crime from happening midway. That is the key, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that's definitely also a shout out to the regulator or to the scheme owner, basically, to have this type of, how did you mention that, the recall message?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a recall message, but in the UK, it's handled through manual direct bank-to-bank or bank-to-PSP channels, and there is so much friction in data interchange that simply something that should take minutes is actually taking weeks.
Mm-hmm. That's totally unacceptable. Yeah, thanks for your insights, Linda and Caspar. Maybe we can go back to the slide where I would like to ask you, Marie-Christine, how, because VOP is just a part of the fraud tool, how do you integrate that in your fraud management systems to help financial institutions?
Yeah, so as we say that EastNets is very much in the compliance fraud detection and AML, and initiating partnerships with IPID was a natural step in our strategy. So definitely the workflow engine can integrate with a single API and get access to a lot of the information for data providers, so that will reduce the cost of integration for the data. But this is not sufficient. So the strategy of EastNets is definitely to look at what we do today with our rule-based systems. And I think that Linda mentioned that it takes a lot of time to do the investigation. So all the rules need to be very well fine-tuned. Otherwise, you will increase the number of alerts, which are maybe not really the alerts that they're not on the right slide, I think. Yes, thank you. So the alerts are really going to increase. So you will need more people to have that. So if we can go back to the slide. Yeah, thank you. And the other point that is very important as well that Gaspar mentioned is that you need speed. And speed, obviously, if you need 15 weeks or 15 days to analyze an investigation, it's very, very difficult. So what we do at the level of EastNet is that we correlate information, which is not really only transaction information, but also entity information and purchase information, in order to have a score that can cover more data, that is much more focused and much of better quality. And we add it for all different types of systems. Some of the models that are really relevant, for instance, for sanction screening, is fuzzy matching detection. For fraud detection, we look at the sequence of operations in the transaction. For AML, for instance, for trade finance AML, we look at positioning of ships in the sea. So we look at different types of information, trying to increase the level of data that is provided through APIs, very simple, and adding the AI models where it's needed in order to improve the scoring, predictability of the scoring by the rule-based systems. This is really the core topic that we do, and we expect that indeed the number of alerts will be reduced, and we can show that between 40 to 70% of the alerts are reduced in certain use cases. And also the data that we can provide to the investigator is much more rich. The investigator will not have to spend time to look at information in different systems. It has everything on the fingertip. It can look at it very quickly. So these AI tools can help to reduce the burden of looking for information, all the bulk effort that you need to do as an investigator. So these are pieces of the effort that can be reduced and give it a little bit more efficient, but also a little bit more effective in terms of alert resolution, because at the end, you will have only the alerts that are really fraud cases, which are limited. As we understand, there are not so many. There are a lot of false positives in the market.
And to add up to that, eliminating a number of false positives is extremely important from a cost perspective. Because from sanction law, you are required to investigate all alerts that you receive. So you need to have the amount of people that to investigate all the alerts you generate, and not set your system in such a way that you only estimate the amount of alerts that for the amount of staff that you have.
Exactly. And the rule-based systems are limited in there. You don't have the flexibility and the capacity to change all the rule-based systems and to adapt to the fraud patterns. So you need really additional AI models, but they must be selective, because AI, as we know, is a hype as well. So it needs to be very selective on the use cases in order to really be effective.
Yeah, here I was wondering, Caspar, if you look into these AI selective usage of AI models, what is the impact of these models? How do you see that implemented in banks? What is your take on that?
So first of all, I think thinking that AI itself is adaptive is something that needs to be built into the model management process in the first place. So AI or machine learning is trained on existing data. So when criminals adapt, you get more data, you need to retrain your models and then implement them accordingly. But when you actually look at the capability and the availability of people in this machine learning area, then there's not that much people around who can effectively implement this. It's growing. And if you look at the real practices which are happening inside, especially smaller institutions, then you need to look behind the slideshows on the X-Codex. You need to actually look at how is it actually implemented, because in the end, fools with the tool are still fools. And especially when it comes to AI, the capability of actually using it effectively inside smaller institutions is very, very limited. Obviously, a lot of vendors are helping out in that area. And actually, I see the biggest practical effect for supplementing rule-based systems is using AI models to suppress alerts and therefore reduce manual workloads. And hopefully the people who are on the case will do more valuable work and actually not close unnecessary alerts and focus on the real fraud. And maybe just to zoom out a little bit from this picture, I think we are only focusing on the last step of the crime. And the last step of the crime is transferring money out of the victim's account and through a mule account and then into crypto or cash or whatever it is. The first step is actually happening through telcos and through big tech. And there is absolutely no fraud regulation applied in that area. And this is actually where the problem starts. The fraudsters need to call up the victims. The fraudsters need to make advertisements on social media or search networks. And actually, the big tech companies are making money on this because they are selling the ads to the fraudsters. And the regulators are only focusing on the last leg of the crime. In order to prevent it, you need to focus on the first step of the crime.
Yes. And that's why, go ahead, Alain.
Just to actually build upon Caspar, I mean, last week actually there was a important conference in Lisbon, and this amazing number about the UK, the level of frauds in the UK. 80% of all the frauds you have today in UK are coming either from the social media industry or the telco industry. So actually, by tackling these two industries first, actually, eventually, you can actually reduce the number by far.
Yeah. And that's where collecting information from these kind of industries, it could be mobile phones, numbers, IP addresses. So all the information that is not really related to the transaction and correlate that information together in something that it's relevant would be very easy, would help to reduce the number of alerts. But a human being and systems today are not yet ready. Having an API that can connect to this data could help. And I would like to go into a little bit more about the generative AI itself, because generative AI is still on the beginning. I would say in all in industries, we see that in our different lives, basically. But what we can know is that the assistant can provide more data. The machine can collect this data, correlate the data, and have an assistance to the fraud expert in order for the fraud expert to take the decision. Obviously, when we go into AI projects, I think we mentioned that at point in time, this includes a lot of data that needs to be collected, that needs to be rationalized. That's the key pitfall, I would say, in these projects. It requires a lot of people to do really the assessment in order to prepare for the data, for the machine to be using it. And then afterwards, it's not just that we have a generative AI and machine there to do the fraud detection. Afterward, there are also pitfalls that you need to avoid, like for instance, performance degradation. You may have to see whether the models are still valid, if the fraud has evolved over time. And also the machine can create some, based on facts, it can create facts which are not real, which are not correct. So being able to explain where the data is coming, being able to have a clarity on the auditing, on the steps that the AI machine is taking, is crucial to make these tools being adopted by the financial institutions and to, at a certain point, replace a little bit what the human being is doing with a risk control and confidence that this is actually doing the fraud detection that is expected. So we are not yet there, I think. We are still, what we see in the market is that we are still putting these projects in place, but definitely it's very promising in terms of fraud detection and fraud analysis. And there are still issues that needs to be addressed definitely in that area.
Yeah, great points, Marie-Christine. I mean, we are not there yet. And what we would like to know from the audience is get a bit your pulse and see, maybe we can raise the poll here. How advanced is your AI machine learning tooling for fraud management and investigation? Is that rule-based only? Is that rule-based systems with some basic AI algorithms? Is that an intelligent hub with a combination of AI tools? Is it an AI assistant or co-pilot even? Or is it unknown? Maybe we discussed it a bit earlier, like where do you see the industry is? Casper, you mentioned it's also a matter of having, the resources, basically the people that can handle these tools. But where do you think the majority of the market is currently? Is it rule-based only? Is it some basic AI algorithms? What would you expect?
Actually, I think we should not confuse the selection of tools with the effectiveness of them. And quite often, whether you have AI-based sanction screening or very effective rule-based sanction screening or fraud screening, doesn't matter. I mean, in the end, you're looking for patterns and based on the existing data. In the end, it doesn't matter what you're using as long as it is producing results. And now, from our internal perspective, we are monitoring our own customers in terms of fraud. We have certain thresholds and standards we keep them up against so that fraud levels stay under control and they don't end up in trouble, and neither do we. For instance, we have established a benchmark that the fraud should not exceed 0.1%. But actually, when we look at the numbers, it doesn't matter if you're talking about value or count. In the end, they correlate by and large. If you look at the actual numbers in the SEPA schemes, then the fraud rate is 0.002% that we are seeing. Mm-hmm. So that is actually 2 payments out of 100,000 are fraudulent. And compare it to a card scheme, this is really, really low. But this is not the industry standard. I've seen some other numbers, say from UK. The UK numbers seem to be like 4 times higher, in some cases 10 times higher compared to Europe in terms of fraud. But I think they are within the limit of still like tolerating it. So the question really is that should we focus on heavy regulation, or should we focus on simply enabling the institutions who are in this soup altogether to exchange data and do it on an effective technological platform?
Yeah, great points. But let's first, before we move on and also look a little bit more into the future and what is needed as a final topic, let's look into the results of the poll and see where the audience is. Rule-based only, and rule-based with some basic algorithms. I think that's a little bit according what you also anticipated, Marie-Christine, before we started.
Yes, I think all the panelists know that AI is the beginning and not yet there. I think we were all expecting that, right? I'm not surprised by the numbers, but I'm asking Alain and
not surprised.
And also Linda and Casper. I'm not surprised.
If you look at those numbers, you actually see that serious AI usage is in the range of, say, 10%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
maybe a quarter are using something to supplement the rule-based system.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest is probably rule-based, including unknown. I hope it's no rules, or it's not no rules.
Okay, well, thanks for your comments. Then just wrapping up, what is the we discussed it earlier. If we just quickly wrap up, like what can the industry do to accelerate adoption of these models? It's some tactical quick wins to enhance rule-based systems with AI and machine learning. It's about interoperability and flexible API-based integrations with VLP providers. Total cost of ownership reduction with cloud deployments specifically for smaller institutions, and selective, AI and machine learning, if adopted selectively, can reduce friction. But I would like to spend a bit more time on sort of the last topic that we want to address before we move on to the questions. That is, what needs to be done in the future to safeguard the system, to build trust in payments, but also to keep costs in control. Data quality and support. Who would like to comment a bit on that first topic?
Yes,
I can certainly. Go ahead.
Yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah, on data quality, definitely using formatted structured data like ISO 20022 can help. Most specifically for corporates today, they have to standardize the way they provide the address information. So this is all elements of information that can help. But also it goes beyond the payment transaction itself. And that's where, for the moment, I don't see any initiative that can help the industry to really have better data quality. Alain?
Yeah, that is exactly what I want to say, right? I mean, typically solutions that are being brought by the regulator or the commission in this context with VOP is to us actually only, a one line of defense you can build to prevent fraud, right? There must be many others. And actually what we see is the combination of these many other lines of defense will be eventually altogether the ultimate weapon or silver bullet against fraud. Typically, when it comes to data quality, yes, there's many other source of data or intelligence you can build around the receiving accounts that can help you eventually building risk scoring mechanism that eventually will tell you whether something is going wrong with a receiving account. Like typically age of the account. If you pay into an account that's been, created the day before, that is signal eventually that something is going wrong. Or the velocity of the account, right? I mean, if you have an account that has had no activity at all for months and months and months, and then suddenly something is coming, that's another signal as well. So many of those signals that eventually being brought together into some kind of risk scoring mechanism or algorithm can help you to do that. And that will be only another line of defense. And I think that there must be many more, because to the point of Casper, I mean, the only rule in the game here is to try always to stay ahead of the fraudsters. And the fraudsters are evolving very fast as well. They're progressing very fast. AI for them is actually an amazing technology they could use in the future as well.
Yes, indeed.
Definitely.
And I think one point as well is identity. I think digital identity and validation on this digital information is very important. Initiatives are in the market, for instance, in Europe and in Belgium, we have an It's Me, which is a collaboration between the government, but also all the industry actors, including the financial industry. So that would help to really have a better understanding of the profile of the fraudster behind. But I think that digital identities is a way to go as well, in fact.
Great topic. And another one is, of course, sharing fraud information within, I guess, the industry itself, but to the point what was also made earlier with other big techs.
By the way, that does exist in other jurisdictions, right? For instance, we do at IP, we connect to South Korea. In South Korea, we can also access to police database, where typically they're sharing information about all sort of fraud that happen on given accounts and all that, fake accounts. So all of that is actually made quite public.
Yeah, Singapore as well, I think.
Singapore as well, yes, yeah, indeed, yeah.
And do we see any initiatives, Casper, you mentioned, lots of fraud starts basically at ill-protected platforms, marketplaces. Is there any discussions going on to share information or to work together with these platforms?
So when we work together with our customers who are payment service providers themselves, then usually the focus goes on to two aspects. First is that to make sure that their onboarding controls are in place, which correlates very much with the identity verification, etc. However, I have to say that even though, for instance, Estonia is probably the world's leading country when it comes to digital identity and authentication and e-signatures and so forth, it does not stop the romance scams. These still happen, and the people will go through any layer of defense that you put on them. But hopping back, sharing fraud information in a speedy way. So, for instance, we are using Sile's AML breach platform. A number of our customers are on it as well, and that this enables actually very quick reaction when an alert is raised. We're able to immediately, basically through an API, send out the request for information, and our counterparties are able to basically rule-based already start blocking the account or halting the payments there. So the speed is of essence, and we need to be very wary of that. Criminals are changing behavior all the time. Every wall you put up, they go around. And essentially, the only way to tackle this is a speedy network of information exchange.
Yeah, and the challenge here is managing the requirements of GDPR, which focuses strongly on consumer protection, which makes it much more difficult to share information. And you do see PSR regulation opening up that a little bit, that for fraud purposes, you can start sharing more personal information, but that PSR still needs to be implemented, right? So that will a couple of years from now. That actually also answers PSR, as the Oscar's question there in the Q&A. Voice over IP will also be mandatory for SET payments. That is in PSR. Of course, there are a couple of exceptions, specifically for corporates, and also if it's a PSP initiated transaction. But yes, you can assume that it will be applicable for SET as well, just a little bit later.
Okay, thanks, Linda. And then maybe finally, Marie-Christine, if you can comment a bit on the regulation that is needed. This is an example of PSR opening up GDPR, but there's other regulation there.
Yes, definitely. When we start using AI technology, the key concern of the regulator is to make sure that whatever type of activities, which typically is the responsibility of a human being, can be explained. If this activity is being done by a machine, we have to have the right tools to audit and to make sure that the machine is doing exactly what a human being should be doing. And this is all the aspects of auditing and explainability of AI that are critical topics for the moment with the regulation. And we expect to have this kind of framework ready in Europe very soon, so that we can really launch really sophisticated AI technologies to help and support the financial industry. This is, I think, the main aspect in terms of AI, that for the moment, most of the institutions do not feel comfortable to adopt in some cases because they don't know exactly what would be the framework and the liability behind the usage of AI technology.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Christine. And also thanks for the other panelists for your insights. I would like to start with the Q&A. We have some questions from the audience. Thanks for already tackling one here, Linda. The question is wait a minute, what do you think, based on the current architecture of banks in Germany, will it be even more difficult or easy to integrate all the technology needed for instant payments? Anyone with insights on the German market that could take this question?
Well, I can say a few words because based on what we have so far observed when it comes to at least the VOP implementation, you could see that in most of the countries you have some initiatives popping up, right? I mean, you have either ECH or other authorities that are now raising their hands and trying to do something. Of course, in Holland, you have already SurePay, but you have also other initiatives in Spain, Italy, France, and others. Germany is, I mean, until very recently, because now I hear that eventually something is cooking, but nothing was foreseen, right? And Germany is also a country where you have a lot of banks. That is the most categorized market in Europe somewhere domestically. So perhaps more collaboration would be needed in that context as well, right? And not also forgetting that when it comes to GDPR rules and all that, Germany is also one of the most protective countries as well. So most sensitive country when it comes to data privacy. So it is the biggest economy, obviously, on the continent, and perhaps the most challenging one as well for us actually to adhere to those new regulations.
Yeah. There's a very basic question. Is VOP or COP different or the same?
There is a slight semantic difference, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it means the same thing. But with verification of payee, you might get a little bit more information, and with confirmation of, you say, okay, yes, this is the right payee or not. But I think in fact implementation, it's the same thing in the UK and everywhere else.
I can confirm this is very similar, and basically you get to know whether the account is open or closed, or does it exist or not, and then also whether the name is a partial match or no match or full match.
Yeah. But the only thing is that COP has already a scheme, right? There are rules that need to be adhered by the industry that keep developing, of course, as well. In Europe, it's not yet the case, right? You have obviously the obligations that the regulation or the law is actually giving you, but then from there you still need to establish what will be actually the rule of operating those mandatory demands, right? And we'll see how it's going to happen over time.
Yeah, and
the liability. Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Sorry, and the complication with it will also be the different way how GDPR is interpreted per country, particularly with respect to consumer privacy. So, what can you give back if there's a small typo in a name?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any insights on how other continents outside Europe are planning to implement similar payee verifications? And this is a question that and they're specifically interested in what's happening in Africa. Any insight there?
You have already, I mean, domestically, you have already many countries that have something, right? I mean, you have that in Nigeria, for instance, you have that in South Africa. So actually many countries that move in Africa, for instance, into real-time payment systems, all that have also defined rules of verification of payee that eventually could be different, and mechanisms could be different as well, but the objective remains the same. In Asia, many countries have adopted that. Latin America to some extent as well. What you see definitely is that based on what is happening in the UK, based on what's happening in Europe, you have no more authorities that are raising their hands, and like in Australia, for instance, Japan is also looking about mandating some kind of control.
Okay, well, thanks. We are really at the end of our webinar. So what I would like to do is thank the audience for staying with us and for engaging with the speakers, and thanks for the panel to bring these insights on the most effective strategies to prevent instant payments fraud without compromising the customer experience. What we will do is we will send you all a link to the webcast shortly, and we will get back to questions that we did not have time to include during this webinar. There's quite a couple of questions, but rest assured, they will be addressed. And for now, I wish you a really lovely rest of the day, and thank you so much for tuning in with us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.